Good morning, everyone. My name is Seth Brown, and I'll be serving as your worship associate today. Whether you're here in person or joining us online, on Zoom or on YouTube, you are welcome here. If this is your first time, I'm so glad that you found your way to step into this new space. And we want you to feel not only welcome, but at home. True is a community where questions are honored, diversity is cherished, and each person's spiritual path, be it secular, spiritual, skeptical, mystical, or somewhere in between, is respected. We invite you to bring your whole self into this space, your doubts, your joy, your grief, your curiosity. There is room here for all of it. If you're visiting, we'd love to get to know you. And if it feels good, now is a great time to share your name and where you're from. I saw an old friend was here, but she disappeared. Andrea was, Rita's daughter is here, Andrea, but she stepped out. So, okay. Well, welcome all. I also want to recognize our online community. Many of you are joining us from home. Some of you are regulars who are traveling, and some are far-flung friends who join us from other places. Some of you might be me and Aaron's mom. You are a real and vibrant part of this gathering, and we're grateful you are here. If you're joining online for the first time, you're warmly invited to say hello in the chat. Let yourself arrive here now. Let your shoulders drop, your jaw soften, your mind settle. You are invited to set other obligations aside and give yourself the gift of an empty mind, simply being here. The Soul Matters theme for this month is paying attention. And today I'm honored to introduce our guest speaker, Aaron Brown, who will be reflecting on Wool and Wolf, the power of truth in tempestuous times. And I also want to offer our ongoing gratitude to our musicians, Paul and Micha. Thank you both. I'm excited for today's musical slate. I saw one of my favorite songs on there. During our Story for All Ages, children and youth, ages 2 through 17 will be invited to come forward. After the story, they're welcome to join Thelma Zabel in the True Room for Creativity Encounters for Youth. Where is Thelma? Is Thelma? Yeah.
Not here today.
Okay, Thelma is not here today. So do we have a program for youth? No. Okay, so youth are welcome to stay here after the story. And a word of thanks to all who make this space possible today. To Mike Kish and Ian Hess for setting up our gathering space and hosting. To Nancy and Bill Flood for coffee hour hospitality. To Liza Ferrier for running our slides. And to Andrew Ferrier for attending to our online community, which is no joke. I've done it. We are a volunteer-powered community, and your presence and efforts matter. If you'd like to become one of our volunteers for Sunday services, please see Andrew Ferrier after the service to offer your name, email, and phone number. And Andrew's over there in the corner. You'll find announcements and upcoming events in your order of service. Please give them a look. There is a grief and loss group. I'm also hearing an echo. Do y'all hear an echo?
Yeah, that's on purpose.
Okay, we want the echo. Navigating Grief Together meets Monday, March 2nd from 1 to 2:30 at the 3rd Street Center in Carbondale. This is a confidential supportive group for anyone experiencing grief from the loss of a loved one, no matter when that loss occurred. The group is facilitated by licensed counselor Dr. Terry Bourdain and offers a compassionate space for sharing, reflection, and connection. There is no cost to attend, and all are welcome. And then we have 2 circle suppers coming up in March, a relaxed home-hosted evening, one centered on, these are a relaxed home-hosted evening centered on shared food and easy conversation. They are a blast. They're really fun, and the food is amazing. The first is an Irish-themed circle supper on Saturday, March 14th from 4:30 to 6:30, hosted in Glenwood Springs. The second is a community circle supper on Saturday, March 28th from 5:30 to 7:30, hosted in Carbondale. And at the rate we're going, by then it'll be like 85 degrees out. If you're interested in attending either supper, please RSVP to Udell Stuckey, and that's udstuckey@gmail.com. Stuckey's with an E. Got that? udstuckey@gmail.com or 970-471-5519. And those details are available on the True website and hopefully also in the program. And now as we shift into our time of reflection, Larry Bogots has an announcement, and I didn't forget. Where are you, Larry?
Then no one can hear you online if you don't use the mic.
That's fine, because this is only for locals.
It's a locals only announcement.
Yeah, I'm sure you're all aware of the probable serious fire season that we have coming up. And I'm working with the fire department and a coalition, hello, and a coalition that is established in order to create something which is apparently very well received and has been utilized in some places. It's a formula. This, here we go. This formula gives the fire department information which it doesn't otherwise have in terms of fire direction, the probability of certain structures to be more flammable than others, and where they can build their fire breaks, and it gives them a strategy which currently is missing. In order for them to do this, they need to have information. The information is on a survey which each of you property owners, each of the property owners in Carbondale have begun to receive by yesterday. They should have all been in the mail out of the printers, and please fill them out and send them back in. If there is any question that in terms of receiving them, just let me know. We'll get you one, no problem. So this is a very important thing. Thank you.
Larry. And now as we shift into our time of shared reflection, please take a moment to silence your phone and devices, and we will begin with the musical prelude.
How many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? Yes, and how many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. many years can a mountain exist before it's washed to the sea? Yes, and how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? Yes, and how many times can a man turn his head, pretending he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? Yes, and how many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
We light this chalice with the chalice lighting this morning from Richard, either Fuchs or Fuchs. May the light of truth illumine our minds. May the spark of love set our hearts on fire. May the flame of freedom burn brightly within us, now and always. Betcher Scholar finalist here. Please remain seated for our opening hymn, number 112, Do You Hear?
Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand, through the sky, through the land? Do you hear, in the heights on the plain, in the vale on the main, in the sun, in the rain? Do you hear, Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush, do you hear in the hush of your soul, hear the cry, fear won't still, hear the heart's call to will, hear a sigh, startling thrill in your soul, in your soul. From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear, all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers, they are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear,
And now, please join me in our spoken unison covenant. Love is the spirit of this community, and service is its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now we'll join in the sung aspiration, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me, sting in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life shape of justice, roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
This is such a thrill. It is so wonderful to be standing in this place, looking at these beautiful faces once more. Hello, all. All right. So once upon a time, in a faraway land of castles and keeps, a group of rebel wizards came to power. They did so with the stated hope of uniting and liberating all of the oppressed peoples in the world. They claimed they would tear down the pyramids of injustice that had been imposed upon all by the kings of old. They would climb into the towers of the powerful where the treasures of the people had been stolen and hidden away, and return these treasures to the people. In truth, however, when the rebel wizards went into the tops of the tallest towers, they found a substance so enchanting, so delicious, so intoxicating, they could not help but keep it for themselves. To justify their hoarding of this precious treasure, they invented lie upon lie and wove these lies into the language of the people, enchanting them with spells that made them feel special and important, all while degrading and undermining them. Each of the spells said one thing, but was secretly encoded to mean the opposite. And as the people spoke the spells, they unwittingly became a part of the great and terrible magic that held the multitudes in servitude. In this land, there was a composer of plays and a small-time practitioner of magic himself who saw what the wizards were doing, and he wanted to stop them. But unlike the wizards, he neither had power nor wanted it. He had to figure out how to rally the people toward their own liberation without becoming like the dark ones that he resisted. One day, he met a greengrocer who each morning put out one of the wizard's most nefarious spells in his shop window. It said, "Workers of the world, unite." What it really meant was, "I am afraid and therefore unquestioningly obedient." But the greengrocer, of course, did not want to acknowledge that's what the true meaning was. The playwright asked him, "What do you mean by that sign in your window? Are you genuinely hoping for unity among the workers of the world? Do you feel an irrepressible impulse to acquaint the public with your ideals?" The greengrocer had to think about this. Finally, he had to answer that he put the sign up because it was given to him by the local wizard in charge of the town, and it was just like the signs in all the other shops and taverns and workplaces around. The playwright nodded gently. "Then it is not your spell," he said. "It is not your sign. It is not your slogan." "No," said the greengrocer. and yet it is spoken in your voice." The greengrocer shifted uncomfortably. "What would happen," asked the playwright, "if you did not speak it, did not share it, did not put it in your window?" The greengrocer's eyes widened. He glanced toward the castle tower where the wizard's black banners hung unmoving in the air. "I would be noticed," he whispered. "And what would happen," the playwright asked, "if you were noticed for speaking only your own words?" The greengrocer was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "I do not remember what my own words are." The playwright placed a hand upon the greengrocer's heart. "They're still here," he said. "They have only been waiting for you to stop repeating the wizard's spells." The next morning, when the sun rose over the cobblestones and the merchants opened their shutters, the greengrocer's window stood empty. The spell was gone. By midday, the wizard's guards arrived. They took the greengrocer away. They also took the playwright. They locked them both in cold stone cells beneath the castle where the air smelled of iron and forgetting. The wizards believed this would be the end of it, but something strange had already begun. The baker across the street had seen the empty window. The seamstress had seen it too. They did not speak of it, but each felt something stir deep inside, a feeling both frightening and familiar, like awakening from a dream they had not known they were dreaming. And in his cell, the playwright began to compose a new spell. He wrote it not with lightning or flame, but with ink and trembling hand. It was only 4 words long. He passed it to a guard who still remembered his own childhood laughter. The guard passed it to his sister. She passed it to a teacher. The teacher passed it to a student. From hand to hand it traveled, quietly, secretly. When people first read this spell, they felt deeply uncomfortable. The words did not twist. They did not conceal. They did not flatter or threaten. They meant exactly what they said, and only that. It felt strange. It felt dangerous. It felt like standing without armor in a terrifying place. Some people quickly hid the words and tried to forget them, but others could not. Because once they had read the spell, they remembered something that they had lost. They remembered themselves. Gradually, more and more people began to live as though the wizard's spells had no power over them. They spoke more carefully. They hung fewer and fewer signs. They listened for a quiet voice within that had been buried beneath so many borrowed words. Even the dark wizards themselves encountered the spell. They read the 4 words in secret chambers late at night, and for a moment, for just a moment, the enchantment they had woven over the land flickered. For the spell did not control others, it freed them. And in freeing them, it weakened the magic of those who depended upon their obedience. The words were these: live in the truth. 11 years after the playwright first wrote them, the towers of the wizards stood empty, their banners fell, their spells dissolved, and the people, long enchanted, stepped blinking into the unfamiliar light of their own unguarded lives. They discovered something the wizards had feared all along. The treasure, the magic, had never been in the castle. It had been waiting quietly within the hearts of the powerless. I invite us all now at this wild moment where the world feels perhaps like it is spinning out of control, to center ourselves in ourselves, to speak the spell, live in truth, into our own hearts. Let it breathe in us. Let us feel it as we sit here. As we take some time to meditate with the music that will show up in a moment, I also hope that we will hold in our hearts our love for each other If there are names of anyone that you would like to speak aloud to draw the attention of this body, of your own body, please do so now. And now I call you into quiet meditation as we enjoy some music. Sit with the truth. Be with who you are.
Let there be light. Let there be understanding. Let all the nations gather. Let them be face to face. Open our lips. Open our minds to ponder. Open the door of concord, opening into grace. Perish the sword, perish the angry judgment, perish the bombs and hunger, perish the fight for gain. Let there be light. Open our hearts to wander. Perish the way of terror. Hallow the world God made.
Our reading today is an excerpt from Disturbing the Peace, a collection of interviews that were conducted with Havel between 1985 and 1986, 3 years before the fall of the Soviet regime. The kind of hope I often think about, especially in situations that are particularly hopeless, like prison, I understand above all as a state of mind, not as a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. It is a dimension of the soul. It's not essentially dependent on some particular observation of the world or estimate of the situation. Hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. The more unpropitious the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper that hope is. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that things will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. In short, I think that the deepest and most important form of hope, the only one that can keep us above water and urge us to do good works, and the only true source of the breathtaking dimension of the human spirit and its efforts, is something we get, as it were, from elsewhere. It is also this hope, above all, which gives us the strength to live and to continually try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do here and now.
So hope is not prognostication. It is not optimism. It is not joy in things going well or trust that something will succeed. Hope is the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. That is the kind of hope that I'm looking for right now. That there is something here in all of this senselessness that makes sense, that we can hold on to and follow like a golden thread through the labyrinth of insanity that seems like it is banging on our doors every day. A war that has just begun. AI powers that seem able to displace most all of our workers, our storytellers. Climate change. The regimes of the great powers at odds with each other and with their own people. Plastic pollution, nuclear proliferation, madness in all directions. Where is the sense that we can follow, that we can hold on to in all of this? Well, I think we get it and can learn a lot about it from this extraordinary manifesto, The Power of the Powerless, that was written by Václav Havel, a playwright, in 1978 under the rule of the communist Czechoslovakian government, which of course was under the rule of the Soviet great power of its day. If you're unfamiliar with this work, as I was until not long ago, I strongly recommend giving it a read because it is powerful, and its central message is to live in the truth. And I believe there is sense in that we can find, that we must seek, and that will set us free, as we have been told for quite some time. To get to it, I'm going to work through three things. Number one, I want to talk about the challenge specifically that Havel presents from his day. Number two, I want to relate that to the challenge we're facing right now. And then number three, I want to try to bring that all home to what we can do in the here and now, what is necessary, I believe, for each of us, and what will give us some sense in the midst of what seems like so much senselessness. I will warn you that last bit I'll leave off toward the end with the question, with the challenge, and we'll come back next week for those who can join us to maybe not complete it fully, but at least to carry through the thread. Let's start with the challenge. In trying to describe how life in communist Czechoslovakia was different than life under a traditional dictatorship, Havel showed us that the real enemy of the people was not a dictator and his thugs, who could simply be overthrown by some other strong men who came along with a new set of thugs. The real totalitarian ruler of his time, which he called post-totalitarian, was ideology. He writes, In an era when metaphysical and existential certainties are in a state of crisis, when people are being uprooted and alienated and are losing their sense of what this world means, this ideology inevitably has a certain hypnotic charm. To wandering humankind, it offers an immediately available home. All one has to do is accept it, and suddenly everything becomes clear once more. Life takes on new meaning, and all mysteries, unanswered questions, anxieties, and loneliness vanish. Of course, one pays dearly for this low-rent home. The price is abdication of one's own reason, conscience, and responsibility. For an essential aspect of this ideology is the consignment of reason and conscience to a higher authority. That higher authority, and this is me now summarizing, is the state. The principle that the center of power is identical with the center of truth. Havel goes on to show how, in his example of a greengrocer hanging a slogan in his window, that the victims of the system, the people who are fed the lies of state ideology, become its agents as they repeat those lies themselves in order to feel like they can stay safe. He writes, ideology in creating a bridge of excuses between the system and the individual spans the abyss between the aims of the system and the aims of life. It pretends that the requirements of the system derive from the requirements of life. It is a world of appearances trying to pass for reality. I'm going to continue with this quote, but I just want to sit with those words a little bit because I think they are so essential to this moment and to the challenge facing us. Are we ready? Are we willing? Are we able? Particularly if it is deeply uncomfortable to do so, are we ready, willing, and able to see where the world of appearances that is trying to pass for reality is not, in fact, our reality? Havel goes on, the post-totalitarian system touches people at every step, but it does so with its ideological gloves on. This is why life in the system is so thoroughly permeated with hypocrisy and lies. Government by bureaucracy is called popular government. The working class is enslaved in the name of the working class. He continues through numerous examples leading to farcical elections become the highest form of democracy. Banning independent thought becomes the most scientific of worldviews. Military occupation becomes fraternal assistance. Because the regime is captive to its own lies, it must falsify everything. It falsifies the past, it falsifies the present, and it falsifies the future. It falsifies statistics. It pretends not to possess an omnipotent, an unprincipled police apparatus. It pretends to respect human rights. It pretends to persecute no one. It pretends to fear nothing. It pretends to pretend nothing. Now, you might hear all of this and think, as I transition now to my second point, talking about the application of Havel's challenge to our current situation, that I am merely referencing a certain regime currently in power in our government. And certainly I feel that these folks are carrying the disease, the virus, that once infected all of Eastern Europe and much of Asia. But no, I want us to think even more broadly than that. When Attorney General Pam Bondi was defending herself and the administration for its conduct in regard to the Epstein files, she said at one point, the Dow is over 50,000 right now. The S&P at almost 7,000, and the NASDAQ is smashing records. Americans' 401ks and retirement savings are booming. That's what we should be talking about. When congressmen laughed at her, she snapped back, I don't know why you're laughing. While this may seem like a non sequitur, who cares about the Dow? We're talking about the lives of children who are horribly abused by the elites in power. I would argue that this line of Bondi's makes all the sense in the world. It is a gateway to the domain of hope and truth that we are seeking, if only we let its deep truth work on us. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier this year who lives and works in Loveland. He runs a contracting business and is connected to a lot of small business owners in town. He talked to a bunch of them in the lead up to the election in 2024 about who they were voting for, and most were choosing Trump. Most said they didn't like him personally. Some women he talked to even admitted they feared him and would never want to be around him. But all of them felt they needed to choose him for the sake of their businesses and their investment portfolios. Havel directed his manifesto to those of us in the West at multiple points, claiming it was a warning we would need in time. However, he also acknowledged that those in the West would have the most trouble seeing the corruption and inevitable failure in our consumer industrial society. He wrote, "The more room there is in the Western democracies, compared to our world, for the genuine aims of life, the better the crisis is hidden from people, and the more deeply do they become immersed in it." Jesus warned in his Sermon on the Mount, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, figs from thistles?" I want all of us to sit with this warning right now. These two voices very much aligned, Havel and 2 millennia earlier, words from a humble Jewish teacher, telling us what to watch for in the kingdoms of earthly power. Wolves in sheep's clothing, lies disguised as truth, ideology bridging people from victimhood to violence. What Havel saw that he knew we in the West could not yet see was that our true masters were all, in truth, ravenous wolves. Ours just had better costumes for a while. His local emperor may have been naked, but ours still seemed dressed in all the finery the world could offer. Now, here's why I see in our current regime an ultimate path to salvation. The wool that he and they are dressed in is paper thin. Yes, there are millions who are still clinging to that thin veneer as though it were resplendent robes, but the truth is burning it away steadily. Each day by day, bit by bit, the truth is fire, and the lies are tissue thin. I don't know why you're laughing, Pam Bondi says, and I think she means it. But I hear in her words a brittleness. The Dow is at 50,000. Why are you laughing? What lies are hiding behind that 50,000 Dow? This time is so unsettled. And that is a gift. It is a necessary gift. I have grown up in a world where I have been told it is my responsibility and in my power to save the earth, to save all of us from the destructions, the ravages of greedy folks. And I have been given money to spend, objectives to reach, a career to follow that absolutely ensures the destruction that I'm being told to fix. We are all agents of this system. And we couldn't see it for a long time because we could see how much our needs were being met inside this system. We could see the freedom that we have. We could see the possibility to say what we wanted, to say what was on our mind, to act truly, but did we have the freedom to live in truth? Go save the world, spend this money to get there. We are being confronted in an enormously powerful way. And it is deeply unsettling and deeply challenging. What do we do? There's not an easy answer to this. I don't think it's as simple as burning our money, walking away from our jobs, letting go of our responsibilities. I think it is a labyrinth that we are navigating. I think there are twists and turns in all directions, but there is a heart to it all. And we are being called to look and see what's there at the heart of it all. What is the lie from which all the other lies spread? And I don't think that I can answer for any of us in this room exactly what that is, although I certainly have plenty of my own theories. What I can recommend is the struggle, and this is what Havel does beautifully in a book that again came out in 1978, and it spread as samizdat, if I'm pronouncing that even close to correctly, but as literature that could be copied and passed along in secret all throughout Czechoslovakia, such that in 1989, when perhaps it was larger economic forces and any number of other collaborative outcomes, when they crashed the Soviet regime, Czechoslovakia had what was called the Velvet Revolution, a completely peaceful transition away from the old post-totalitarian dictatorship into a new world. Havel became the first leader of that new country, and then they had the Velvet Divorce, where the Czech Republic and Slovakia split from each other, again without violence, and he continued to be the president for the next 10 years. And I don't think that they moved from lies into perfect truth. They moved into a new world that was also complex and that was harder to even see what was true and what was lies. But it was a step in the right direction. We all have steps in front of us, and it is up to all of us to figure out what those steps are, but I can promise that everything we're seeing out there is a reflection of what is in here. The lies out there are structured the same as the lies in here. If we sit with those, if we dwell within those and simply say, I want to live in truth, I would ask you simply to notice what emerges. And what Havel recommended to his friends in 1978 and to others who read his samizdat was simply to continue to try to live in truth and in community with others. To become a dissident like him, but it didn't have to even be outward. It just had to mean produce more truth, speak more truth, be in more truth. And he identified dissidents as those who defend human life, those who care for each other. I think we saw such a profound and beautiful act of dissidence in Minneapolis. What I heard and what I read from people who were there is that it wasn't just resistance and antagonism to the masked agents who were committing murders in their streets. It was the sense of community that started to emerge as people took care of each other in that sub-zero weather. Each time they would show up at some of the places of resistance, the love that they said they felt was overwhelming. And Havel located the beginning of the revolution there in encountering each other with love and truth in spaces of resistance and protection of those who are vulnerable. I know that's part of it. The other parts of it we'll get to next week in more depth, but intentionally next week, not just because we're getting to the end of this time and I need another week to figure out what else to say, but because truly the call is to sit with what it means in your own soul. What are the lies at the root of the lies? What is seeking to control outcomes? give just one or two other little bits from Havel to leave you with as you consider this. One point in the manifesto, he writes that individuals need not believe all the mystifications, but they must behave as though they did, or they must at least tolerate them in silence or get along well with those who work with them. For this reason, however, they must live within a lie. They need not accept the lie. It is enough for them to have accepted their life with it and in it. For by this very fact, individuals confirm the system, fulfill the system, make the system, are the system. So it's not as simple as simply saying, there's lies out there, I know they're lies, and continuing to get along well with all that is. But what is this system? What's going on? Havel writes, between the aims of the post-totalitarian system and the aims of life, there is a yawning abyss. While life in its essence moves toward plurality, diversity, independent self-constitution, and self-organization, in short, toward the fulfillment of its own freedom, the post-totalitarian system demands conformity, uniformity, and discipline. While life ever strives to create new and improbable structures, the post-totalitarian system contrives to force life into its most probable states. The system of lies seeks to control by making things look more probable, more predictable, more controllable. And I think that's a clue. One last clue that I'll leave you with. It has always been fascinating to me that the story of the rise of Israel's first great king, David, is not told in the book of David. It's told in the book of Samuel. Who's Samuel? Samuel is a guy who dies in the first third of the first book of 2 books that bear his name. Who's Samuel? Samuel was a preacher, was a priest. And he was asked as the head priest to name a king over the people. And he told them, you guys are crazy. Do you know what a king will do to you? He'll take your children, he'll take your treasures, he'll send you to war. He will cause all kinds of devastation in his efforts to control you. And the people said, yes, that's what we want. And thus kingship came into the world. Okay, no answers, no certainties, and yet hope is something that we can believe in, that we can trust completely, and I think it is buried right here in this territory we're looking at. I think it is so exposed when we draw a line from Samuel to Jeffrey Epstein. And I think it is necessary for us to do some digging in our hearts and in the space around us to see what is true and what it means to live in truth.
I surrender it all. I know there's nothing I can do. All the struggle and the trying, I wrap it up and hand it off to you. Come take it all, I can't carry it one more step on this path. Take it now, though I know I was the one putting it on my back. Yeah. Hey. 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 Oh. When I forget that my true power lives only ever in the present tense, and when I try to please others and rush to strengthen my defense, tear it down. I don't want to live in a cage made of fear. Raise me up to the knowing that my best self is already here. Yeah. Hey. 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 Oh. Stepping out into this day, and I wanna dance with you. Want to drink in all the beauty, board a rocket ship of truth. Here's my hand, come take it. I am you, and you are me, and our future, we can make it bolder than we dreamed it would be. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Guys, that was amazing. You wrote that? Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And very fitting for today. Thank you. At this time in our service, we pause to recognize the shared commitment that keeps this community vibrant and alive. True exists because of the generosity of spirit, time, and resources offered by those who believe in what we're creating together. If you feel moved to support the work of this community within these walls and beyond, you're warmly invited to give as you are able. You can make a donation online at true.org by clicking Give at the top of the homepage, or using the QR code, which is up on the screen, or in your bulletin. If you're with us in person, you may also contribute using the offering plate as it is passed. And if you're a guest today, feel free to enjoy our hospitality without a sense of financial obligation. However you choose to give, through your presence, your energy, your kindness, or your financial gifts, we are deeply grateful.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Thank you all. And now please remain seated for our closing hymn, number 391, Voice Still and Small.
still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still we remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. Voice still I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still we remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still we remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
Love that music. Thank you. Oh. So Havel talked about there was an ally that people who began to live in truth and speak the truth would find. And he said that we knew this was there because there were so many people who were alienated. And that may seem odd at first. The reason that he said that is because to be alienated, you have to be made alien from something. What are people alienated from? And he said what they're alienated from is the deep sense of truth that is in every one of us. And that deep sense of truth in each of us is the ultimate ally that allows, as he says at one point, a single person to stand down a division as he steps forth or she steps forth in her truth. There is a thread here. It is a golden, shimmering, shining thread. We will find it as we tap into our truth, and that truth will look different for each one of us. I invite you, encourage you with the most profound delight, commend to you this search for truth.
Will extinguish the chalice. Our chalice extinguishing words are from Elizabeth Sell Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we hold in our hearts until we are together again. And now, please rise in body or spirit and join hands for our sending forth song, One World Home by Jimmy Byrne.
All the joys and the griefs, the colors and beliefs, the sunlight shines upon us all the same. Open minds, loving hearts, helping hands, it's a start. One world home, one world home, one world home. Open minds, loving hearts, helping hands, it's a start. One world home, one world home, one world home.